Here on the Motoring Chronicle, we love going through some of the most popular questions that you guys are asking now when it comes to road networks in the UK. And something that I've seen pop up recently is who decided the names of roads in the UK? Now, this is a very big question to answer. After all, the UK's road network in truth predates the UK, predates even England as an idea, really, because even if you go back 2,000 years to the times of the Romans, when they first came to what is now England, they actually said that a lot of the roads that they built during their time, they were either based on top of or just inspired really by older routes that were already there when they got to the UK like 2,000 years ago. So there's a lot to cover when it comes to this, but I'll start by quickly just going over what the actual process is for naming roads in the UK, what the term is for this, and it's actually odominy. And that basically sets the street or road naming conventions in the UK. Now, when it comes to local streets in towns, they're very matter of fact. And what I mean by that is that there are some very kind of standards that you really see in most places in the UK. For example, the main trade place for a town or a city is known as the High Street or the Main Street or something like that, because that's back in the day where most of the kind of foot traffic and everything went through, so it was known as the Main Street or the High Street because it got a high number of people being there. And from there, most of the roads will be known just as roads. Roads and streets are effectively the same thing, but they're just called something different. It's just another word for actually putting at the end of something, and these are known as suffixes. And when it comes to this, there's all kinds of different ones: way, lane, hill, row, alley. It all depends on just what kind of terrain it's on and what is there. For example, Bank Street, if you've got a Bank Street in your actual town or city, then at some point, if indeed it still actually is, you would have had a bank on there at some point. That's basically what it is, very matter of fact. And it does lead to actually some funny names in the UK. There's a lot of, I won't share it because obviously it's got some rude language on it, but there are some places and some roads and streets in the UK that have very funny names, and they've not really stood the test of time in terms of practicality. For example, But Close is actually quite close to where I live, which is just makes it kind of a funny name at the end of the day. There's a lot worse ones than that. Just, oh yeah, if you want to go look them up, be my guest, but I'm not going to repeat them on this video because I don't want to get it demonetized at the end of the day. There is a bit of an anomaly really when it comes to naming streets in the UK, and that is the City of London. Now, for those that don't know, there are two Londons in a sense, or one London, but one place that's technically not called London that everybody calls London. So the City of London is actually somewhere right in the centre of what is commonly known as London. Most of what people know as London, Greater London, is actually called the City of Westminster. The City of London is effectively enveloped by that. The City of London is somewhere right in the centre of London. You'll know it when you go there because it's got different road signs and things like that. It's pretty obvious you're in somewhere else that is not quite like the rest of London. But interestingly, there are no roads there in the literal sense. There's nowhere that's actually called roads, just because of tradition, basically, aside from Goswell Road. Now, that actually goes through to the City of London today. It didn't historically. It has done for the last 30 years or so, since 1994. So there is an exception to that rule now, but most of them are just basically just one word. For example, Cheapside or something like that. There's no Cheapside Road or Cheapside Lane. It's just Cheapside. So interesting for sure with stuff like that. And again, just one that off the top of my head, the Shambles in places like York. I'm pretty sure that is actually the road that passes through there. It's not known as Shambles Way or Shambles Lane, I don't think. It's just the Shambles. But yeah, so that's what it is on a local level. It's just a matter of fact kind of explanation for what is there or what was there. That's what it was named as. But bringing things into the modern era where people travel between cities and towns all the time, A-roads and B-roads. And I've gone into detail about A-roads and B-roads and how they work, and I'll put the image on the screen up there for you guys, just like I did in the previous video. So this is for Great Britain. So England, Wales, and Scotland. We'll get on to Northern Ireland eventually. They're a little different to everybody else when it comes to this, because they're not on what is kind of mainland Britain, if you will. It's on the island of Ireland. It's different, even though the Great Britain isn't technically a mainland. It's not on mainland Europe. But anyway, basically the numbers that you can see on that diagram there, they refer to the different corridors when it comes to motorways and A-roads. So for example, that blue section on the eastern part of England, that is the M1 corridor. Every road pretty much that you will see in there that's an either an M, A or B road will all start with a 1. So the M1 is there, the A1 is there. If there's an A101, it should all be there. Now, a lot of these routes are based off of previous routes that have been around for a long time. A lot of the motorways were basically either based upon or built upon previous A roads when those were being starting to be built in the 1960s. I've gone more in depth in another video about that if you want to go check it out. But in terms of the actual convention for these, that's how that works. Now, there are exceptions to this. There are some roads within this that actually have numbers that don't associate to the corridor they're in, but there's not too many of those. And you'll also see maybe some roads as well that actually have duplicate numbers. And what I mean by that is that some of the numbers are actually used twice in certain places. So, for example, the Leicester Ring Road in the Midlands has the same designation as a road in Cumbria in the far northwest of England. They're both known as the A594, for example. So, again, there are exceptions to this, but in general, that is what it is. The number and actual letter, it actually is only used for one road, and if they are used twice, they are unconnected, they are far away, but again, it's rare that happens. But who actually decides upon these names? What if someone decides to actually make a new road in the UK, for example, maybe an M7 up in Scotland, which is where it would have to be? That's another video in itself that I've done before. Why is there no M7 in the UK? Well, for example, with this one, if it's in Scotland, then this would be decided by the Scottish Office, or as it's known nowadays, the Scottish Government, basically, the Department for Transportation. Within that, they would decide the road designation for that. England and Wales, they use the Department for Transportation, which is based down in London. They would decide upon the road name for something that's on a national level, such as a motorway, an A road, or a B road. On a more local level, though, it's slightly different. With that, it's basically city, borough, or district councils, whoever is actually responsible, that would name those roads. So, for example, where I live in Huddersfield, it would probably be something like Kirklees Council that would decide upon the name of the road, just to make sure it doesn't clash with anywhere else in the area that it is. You'll find plenty of roads that have duplicate names in the UK, but they won't usually be in the same area unless they are something very common like a high street or something like that. They will generally try and avoid using the same name more than once when possible. But there is one elephant in the room. Like I said, there is Northern Ireland, which is a little different to everything else. And it's not something that I've really covered. And you're probably wondering, well, how do the roads actually get named here? What are they actually called? Well, similar to the rest of the UK, they do use a similar actual naming scheme. So for motorways, they are known as M's. So there is an M1 in Northern Ireland that runs between Belfast and Dungannon. But it's nothing to do with the M1 in the UK that runs from near London up to, I think it's north of York, where it actually becomes the A1 again. I forget the area where it is anyway, in the north of England. That's the important thing for that. And when it comes to an explanation for how it works, is there a zonal system? No. Is there an explanation for how these numbers are actually allocated? No, it's just basically whatever they want. It's anarchy, guys. They call them whatever they want. There's no M4 in Northern Ireland for whatever reason, but there is an M5. Just little things like that. It's rather strange to say the least, but it's whatever they want it to be at the end of the day. And when it comes to who decides upon the name for these roads, it is the Department for Infrastructure Roads, or the DFI roads, which basically it's basically the Department for Transportation, but in Northern Ireland. When it comes to more local routes, of course, it's similar to the rest of the UK. Again, local councils or whatever, or borough councils, they will decide upon the names for these roads. But when it comes to A roads, M roads, and B roads, and even there are actually C roads. I mean, there's C roads in the rest of the UK as well, but there are C roads too in Northern Ireland when it comes to that. So yeah, there we go. Something else, the last thing I'm going to mention, because it's been a long video, I know. Europe has something called the E-route system, the European road system. And some routes in the UK actually are a part of the E-road system that is used in the rest of Europe. Again, it's instead of being nationalized road numbers and stuff, that's for the entirety of Europe. Now, you're probably wondering, E-roads, I've never heard of those before. Well, you probably won't have done, because there's no signage in the UK to indicate that, I don't know, for example, I don't know what the numbers are, but let's just say the M1 in the UK is actually like the E9 or whatever. There's no signage for that. A, because it's confusing. B, because we're not really that enthused with it, really. I mean, you can see it on some maps, of course, but when it comes to practicality, these E numbers for roads that are part of the European system isn't really a part of it. It's not really there. So yeah, there we go, guys. That's who actually names all the roads in the UK, how a brief explanation of how they work as well. I hope you enjoyed that video. There's also systems as well that they use in places like the Isle of Man, the Channel Islands. There's all kinds of things like that. They all basically follow a similar system, but they are of course separate to Great Britain, and that is also the case for Northern Ireland as well, being separate from Great Britain. But I hope that was a decent explanation for you guys. Let us know, of course, if you have a topic suggestion for us to go through next on the motoringchronicle.com. I hope you enjoyed this one, and we'll see you very soon, guys. Have a good one.